Chapter 1. Something to do. My mom was an only child, and both of her parents had died before I was born. My dad, who unexpectedly died in an epidemic almost a year ago, had an older sister by 2 years. His mother died of a heart attack when I was 8 years old, and his father currently resides in a nursing home. My grandfather had suffered a series of strokes, which severely damaged his brain, and he eventually lost touch with reality. The last time we visited him, he didn't know who we were, or even who he was. It was the last week of my junior year in high school. While everything had been fine before, my mother and I struggled after Dad died. Not only was Mom having difficulty coping with life without her soulmate, but she had financial problems as well. Although I now was old enough to understand what was going on, and I was able to help out and do some things that my dad previously had done, I still was a minor and my mom's dependent. I did what I could, but there was only so much I could do. It was Saturday and raining outside. I had made myself a ham sandwich for lunch and poured a glass of almond milk. I sat at the table eating, staring out the window, and wondering how Mom was doing. Desperate to make financial ends meet, she had submitted job applications everywhere that she imagined she'd have even a remote chance of landing a better job. Even after Dad's life insurance paid out, our house still wasn't paid for, and Mom's current dead-end job didn't pay enough to support the two of us. After lunch, I studied for final exams, trying to forget about our problems. About 4 hours later, I couldn't focus anymore, so I got up to stretch and looked out the kitchen window. It was still raining, but the rain had lightened up a bit. That's when my phone rang. It was Mom, and when I answered, she was screaming at full volume. "Luca! I did it, honey! I got a job! I actually got a real job. It pays 5 times what I'm making now, and that's just to start." Lucas was her father's middle name, and I was named in his memory. Since childhood, my parents had always shortened it, and the nickname Luca has stayed with me into high school. Personally, I always thought Lucas sounded cooler than Lucas anyway, not that I minded Lucas. Either was better than my middle name, Tracy, which I always thought was more of a girl's name. Maybe that's because Tracy was my grandmother's name on my father's side. The two names really don't sound good together, but I didn't have a vote at the time. "Mom, that's great! You didn't even think you had a chance at that one." Mom had been on her follow-up interview for one of the jobs that she almost didn't apply for. It had seemed like such a long shot, but she submitted her application because she had no choice but to apply for every job that paid enough money to support us, regardless of whether her qualifications and experience matched the listings. I know. This is an answer to all of our prayers. Mom's joy gushed through my phone's speakers like a waterfall of sound. She was so excited that she had trouble breathing, and her voice was all loud and squeaky, which always happened when she got excited. It made it all the more obvious when her tone abruptly shifted. "Although, we will have to make some adjustments, but I'll fill you in on the details when I get home. I'm stopping by your aunt's to tell her the good news in person, then I'll go get us some Chinese takeout for dinner, to celebrate." "Would you like that?" "That sounds great. Chinese food was my favorite. I'll clean up around here and have the table ready for when you get back." "I'm so happy for you." "Thanks, honey. I still can't believe they offered the job to me." "I'll see you soon." A gloomy, boring Saturday afternoon just turned into the best day our family has had since Dad died. Mom and I both had been worried that we might have to sell the house and get a small apartment, but now it seems that we've caught a break. It did seem a bit odd that Mom would drive all the way to Aunt Sophie's rather than just call her, but those two always had a peculiar relationship. Come to think of it, so did Aunt Sophie and Dad. Dad was anything but wimpy. He had a large frame, was naturally strong, and people looked up to him, especially Mom. Never once did I see him show the slightest disrespect toward Mom, or even raise his voice to her, yet she waited on him like a servant. For an otherwise modern couple, they both were a bit old-fashioned in their marital roles. Dad always protected Mom, and never let her do anything that might be too physically demanding. Even after years of marriage, he always opened doors for her, helped her out of the car, and pulled out her chair for her at the dinner table. He always was aware that he was setting an example for me. I recall one time, when I asked him why he did all of those things, he said, smiling, "Son, as you grow up, you'll realize that there are times when you'll need to be a man, and times when you'll need to be a gentleman. The time to be a gentleman is always when in the presence of a lady, and don't you ever forget that." Dad was one of those guys who looked so intimidating that he rarely got into fights when growing up. Even as an adult, other men seemed to watch their behavior and language around him, especially if women were present. That's something that I noticed more as I grew older, and from what I could tell, it was more out of respect than fear. He was one of those rare people that made others feel better just from spending 5 minutes in his company. While cleaning the kitchen, I thought more about that, and how completely different he was around his sister. It was almost as though Dad and Aunt Sophie still were children, the way he admired her. Normally, everyone else cared about what Dad thought, but with Sophie around, Dad practically was hypnotized. Whatever she said, be it about business, politics, food, or even raising their own son, Sophie's word was gospel, as far as Mom and Dad were concerned. Sophie treated Mom as though she were her little sister by birth, not just an in-law. In fact, after Dad died, it was Sophie who pushed hard for Mom to apply for so many jobs that seemed out of her reach. Mom's victory today no doubt will elevate Sophie to goddess level in her eyes. Aunt Sophie always had been very good to us, but politeness wasn't her forte. Personally, I always considered her to be quite a bitch, attitude-wise, but I never saw her do anything mean-spirited or selfish. I don't think she gets along with anyone but us, come to think of it. She always seems to do the right things, but she often talks down to others in the process. I suppose that's why everyone else admired and loved Dad instead of her, even though they both were respected. I remember several times in my childhood, Aunt Sophie would babysit me so that my parents could stay out late on dates. Once the coast was clear, she would let me do anything I wanted, as long as I swore an oath of secrecy. I got to watch all of the cool, R-rated movies that my parents wouldn't allow me to watch. On Aunt Sophie's computer, I could surf anywhere I wanted on the web. Anytime I came across a particularly dirty word, she would explain to me exactly what it meant, in gory detail, and exactly why ladies and gentlemen shouldn't use it. She even let me try beer and wine with dinner, not enough to get drunk, but just to find out what they tasted like. My aunt never used baby talk with me. Even when I was very young, she always spoke to me as though I were her age, which amused my parents. Even now, she talks to me like I'm a grown man with a job and adult responsibilities. I've always found it strange how she can show me respect in that way, yet make snide remarks about the least little thing that doesn't meet with her approval, such as my wardrobe choices. Anyway, I suppose Mom feels obligated to pay homage to her big sister in person, especially now that it's just the 3 of us in the family. Aunt Sophie remains single, and while I've heard, from my parents, that she dates, I've never seen her with a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Still thinking about my aunt, I had finished cleaning the kitchen and was taking the laundry out of the dryer when I heard 2 cars pull into the driveway. I looked out from the window and saw both Mom's and Aunt Sophie's cars. I chuckled and shook my head, seeing Mom's little red Toyota dwarfed by Aunt Sophie's huge Mercedes-Benz. I rushed out the door to meet them, taking the bags of Chinese food from my aunt's car. Sophie insisted on celebrating the good news with us, and she even bought our takeout dinner from the best Chinese restaurant in town. Mom announced. Aunt Sophie quipped, I offered to take the two of you out tonight, but your dear mother insisted on a more intimate, albeit more rustic, celebration at home. My aunt wasn't looking at either of us when she said that, but as she turned to walk toward our front door, she caught me rolling my eyes at her remark. She winked and gave me a wry smile. Despite being educated, elegant, and refined, Aunt Sophie has a nasty streak, but she's always there for us. Mom already had kissed me on the cheek and scurried into the house, seemingly oblivious to the slight, or perhaps she was just so used to Aunt Sophie's attitude that the casual insults no longer registered. Apparently, Aunt Sophie's deeds outweighed her words in Mom's view. Besides, Mom was too excited to focus on anything but getting to the table so that she could give me all the details. Aunt Sophie brought some sparkling wine to help us celebrate, and some Riesling to have with dinner. Mom couldn't stop smiling while explaining every last detail of how the interview went, how much money she would be earning, and what she'd be doing. She answered all of my questions before I could ask them, so I just ate and listened. Finally, she emptied her glass of wine and took a deep breath. Her facial expression, still gleeful, became more serious, and she dropped her hands to her lap. Now. I briefly mentioned that we'd have to make some adjustments. Mom directly addressed me, as though Aunt Sophie weren't there. The only potential problem is that I'll have to start right away, and there will be several weeks of on-the-job training. As I mentioned, I'll be involved in all of the company's North American business. I'll have to fly to the company's worldwide headquarters in Atlanta and train there for a while, then I'll fly to Toronto to the company's Canadian headquarters. So, I'll be gone for the entire summer, at least. Wow. That's a lot of training. I simply stated the obvious, not knowing how to react. It didn't seem like that big of a deal to me, but I assumed she was concerned because I'm still a minor. True, but I'll be getting paid, so the bills won't be a problem. I know you're almost 17, but I still don't feel right about leaving you alone all summer. It wouldn't be practical to take you with me, because you'd be bored, and with the hours I'd be working, I'd barely see you anyway. I stood up, walked over to her chair, and hugged her. Mom, it's been rough for both of us. I've had to grow up faster since Dad died, and you and I have been able to keep things going. Our only problem was being able to afford to keep the house, and now you've solved that problem. Let me take care of things here while you train. I can handle it. Aunt Sophie stepped in and backed my argument, but she went a bit further than I needed. Sarah, I can look in on Luca. It's not as though he'd be completely on his own. Or, if that's not enough, he could stay with me until you get back. Luca, a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned that you were trying to line up a job for the summer. If you haven't found one yet, I could put you to work for me, assuming that you're interested. Sophie, that would be great. But I hate burdening you, after all you've done for us since Gordy died. Mom, like she said, she has a job for me, so it's not like I'd be freeloading. Precisely, confirmed Aunt Sophie. Not to mention, we're family, you two are a joy to me, never a burden. Not only would Luca have a paying job, but I'd also expect him to help out around my house, too. Every so often, we'd both drive over here to tidy up, collect the mail, check the plumbing, and take care of whatever else needs attending. Under the circumstances, I didn't mind Aunt Sophie taking liberties and speaking for me. I would do whatever it took to make this situation work for Mom. Of course, I was under the assumption that I would be working at my aunt's art gallery. Mom stood and hugged me, then hugged Aunt Sophie, who remained seated. Then it's settled. You two know how much it means to me to not be a financial burden on anyone, including family. You've both kept my spirits up so many times when I felt like collapsing. It'll feel so good to carry my own weight. Aunt Sophie earned a good living and had offered to help us pay the bills. Up to this point, Mom wouldn't let her, but if Mom hadn't landed this job when she did, she would have had to swallow her pride and accept her sister's money. My aunt had told me, privately, that regardless of what happens with my mom's career, I wouldn't have to worry about university tuition. If I wanted to go to any school, all I had to do was earn the grades and test scores to get in, and she'd pay for everything. Mom was crying tears of joy. And Luca, your father would be so proud of you. You've really stepped up and behaved more like an adult than a stereotypical teenager. Now, you'll be able to focus on girls and homework, and not have to worry about how we'll survive. Of course, Aunt Sophie never would have let us go under. Mom knew that, but she also understood that being financially dependent on someone else changes the family dynamic. She also wanted her sister's respect, and her son's. She'll always have mine, no matter what. Almost 2 weeks later, our daily routine would drastically change, if only for the summer. I had aced all of my classes and I was glad to finally get a break from school. Aunt Sophie and I took Mom to the airport, then we sped across town to my aunt's mansion, where I would live until school started again in the fall. This was the first time Sarah had flown first class, and her new employer was paying for all of the travel expenses. She had a window seat, and the seat next to her was vacant, so she stretched out and tried to relax. She watched as the ground moved further away, more focused on the family she was leaving behind than her path forward. There would be plenty of time for work, though. This moment was about reflection. She thought of the wonderful husband she had lost, and the amazingly supportive son and sister she still had. She would miss them very much over the summer, but she was determined to make them proud of her. Chapter 2 Dirty Black Summer. Wait, you're really not joking? Luca, in your entire life, have you ever heard me joke about anything? Well, no, now that you mention it. In all seriousness, my previous maid recently quit, so that's why I had a job opening for you. You're getting paid, at special family wages, I might add, to do a job, and this is the uniform appropriate to that position. Now stop your whining and try it on, so I'll know whether to alter the measurements before I order a complete set. With her right arm extended, my aunt was holding out a traditional black and white female maid's uniform. In her left hand, dangling at her side, she held a pair of women's high heels, in black. I remained calm, more amused at my aunt than insulted. Aunt Sophie, as you're no doubt aware, I'm a boy, almost a grown man, and I thought you were offering me a regular job. Why would you think that I'd want a job as a maid? And even so, why would it be necessary for me to dress the part? I mean, I'm used to doing housework, so I don't object to helping out. But, it's just us here, so a uniform seems way too formal, not to mention too feminine, even if I were a girl. Besides, you don't seem like the type of woman who's into cosplay, let alone crossplay. Luca, you're a sharp boy, which is one of the many reasons I'm so fond of you. I shouldn't have to explain to you that I'm using your emotions against you. Specifically, your love for your mother and your willingness to do anything to help her when she needs you the most. It's called manipulation. Now hurry up and get dressed. I'm dying to see how accurately I guessed your measurements. Aunt Sophie, I don't think manipulation works if you announce it. Aunt Sophie had her secrets, but I can't say that she ever lied to any of us, technically speaking. But she did have a tendency to hold relevant information until it was absolutely necessary to divulge it. True, she wasn't the type to actually joke around, but she did have a dark sense of humor in the way she told the truth. In that case, do it for the money. I'll double your wages. There, now be a good maid and try on your new uniform. Just humor me for now, and I'll explain my reasons later. I promise you that it'll all make sense. Meanwhile, you can work on an argument for talking me out of it, and maybe I'll consider finding you a different summer job, for much less pay, of course. I couldn't help but laugh out loud at her brand of logic. I also couldn't help but do the math. Twice what she offered to pay me for the summer was more than Mom earned in a full year at her old job. And with Mom making real money now, I could afford to put most of this money away in my own savings account. Mostly out of greed, but partially out of curiosity, I relented and played along. All right, I'll try it on just for you. But promise me that you'll keep your phone in your purse. If you send Mom a snapshot of me in a frilly, girl's uniform, I'll never hear the end of it. I wouldn't put it past you two women to have a bet on whether you could talk me into wearing this maid's outfit, I chuckled. Dear, I promise I won't take your photo unless you drop to your knees and beg me to. Awkward and cringy, I mumbled as I took the short dress and strappy shoes. I turned to go upstairs to my room, but I was stopped by my aunt's raised voice. That's the wrong way, maid. The guest rooms are upstairs. The servants' quarters are downstairs, on the other side of the kitchen. You'll change in there. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a business call to make. Just come into my study once you've changed, and I'll inspect you. My aunt turned and marched off, her spiked heels sounding like ice picks stabbing the ceramic tiles. I wasn't sure about any of this, but being a big fan of anime, I had cosplayed before with some of my friends, so it didn't freak me out. However, wearing a female costume would be new territory for me. I had spent the night in this enormous house many times, but this was my first time to enter any of the maids' rooms. For as long as I can remember, my aunt had a live-in maid or two to prepare her meals and do all of the cleaning. My aunt had no interest in learning how to cook and clean, and she enjoyed being waited on. It was only a couple of years ago when I realized just how wealthy she was, so I knew that she could afford as many full-time staff positions as she wanted. I often wondered why she still worked at all, but I didn't think it was my place to ask. The maid's room assigned to me was relatively small, but it had its own full bathroom, 3 huge closets, with a combined volume about as large as the rest of the room, a frilly, white canopy bed, a wall-mounted television with internet access, and a very girly-looking white vanity table. The vanity had a large mirror against the wall with lights surrounding the frame, and a padded swivel stool tucked under the table. On the vanity was an assortment of makeup products, obviously set out for me by my aunt, a bottle of Insolence perfume by Guerlain, and there was a woman's wig on a stand with a card hanging from it. My dear, sweet, little Tracy, it read. The cosmetics are optional for today, but I'm hoping you'll throw yourself into the spirit of the role and give them a try. However, I really do need you to wear the wig with the uniform. I've already attached the headpiece to it, so all you'll need to do is put on the wig cap to cover your own hair, and the wig will slip right on. Feel free to shower and shave first, if you deem it necessary. There is a full-length mirror on the bathroom door, to help you get dressed. You'll also find some black fishnet stockings in one of the dresser drawers, as well as a padded bra. The sandals and dress won't fit right without them, and I need accurate measurements. Please take your time and try to enjoy yourself. I'd rather you do it correctly than quickly, although both would be even better. Love, your beautiful and successful Aunt Sophie, who's done so very much for you and your mother during your darkest hours. She really knows how to pile it on thick, I muttered. I took a peek into the bathroom, which was every bit as feminine as the bedroom. There were all sorts of beauty products, lotions, powders, a hairdryer, a curling iron, a soft pink bathrobe, and a few things that I had no guesses about. The cabinet under the sink contained more of the same, including boxes of tampons, panty liners, and other feminine hygiene stuff. I assumed that Aunt Sophie was planning on hiring another full-time maid, and probably would after the summer ended. Having already showered first thing this morning, I quickly washed my face, then I immediately started changing. While I convinced myself that I'd go along with this only for my aunt's sake, actually putting on a bra, panties, a dress, and high heels for the first time made me feel queasy. I think we're all curious about how the other sex lives, but this was the first time that I'd worn any girls' or women's clothing. Immediately, I felt like someone else. It was similar to cosplay, or wearing a Halloween costume, but much more intense, as though I were entering the neutral zone of gender. Men's clothes make me feel manly, and these women's garments were making me feel feminine with equal force. I wasn't prepared for how powerful the shock was, though. It was one thing being in such a feminine room, I simply felt like an observer. But now that I was putting on these clothes, I felt myself becoming the primary source of femininity in the room. Between common sense and having seen female characters getting dressed in films, I managed to figure out everything except for the apron. It was just a simple waist apron, thank goodness, but I still couldn't get the bow and the back to look good. The ankle straps on the sandals were easy to figure out, but not so easy to actually buckle without using the mirror. Standing in heels for the first time was an experience I never had anticipated. I held onto the bed frame and walked around in it a U-pattern several times, until I felt comfortable letting go. The heels weren't tall spikes like my aunt was wearing, but any women's heels felt high to me. It was surreal seeing my padded bra filling out the dress and giving me female curves. Even so, I still looked like a boy in a dress, until I put on the wig. It was already pulled up in a bun, with a few loose strands hanging down, and with the headpiece pinned in. Once I had it on straight, and I stared into the full-length mirror, I realized that I looked like an actual maid, not just any girl in a dress. The white headpiece and frilly apron against the jet black background of the dress probably is one of the most iconic uniforms in modern culture. It certainly is popular meme in anime and manga. And here I was, wearing one of them, wearing a female maid's uniform so that I can work as my aunt's maid for the next several weeks. She hadn't actually said that, and I hadn't yet agreed to it, but I knew that's what she wanted. I couldn't figure out why, but if she didn't volunteer the reason soon, I'd press her on it. Instinctively, I started folding my own clothes and tucked them away in a dresser drawer, and placed my sneakers under the bed. Those were my first unofficial chores as a maid. As I bent back up, I came face to face with myself in the vanity mirror, and I sat down. I scanned my face, then looked down at all of the makeup that my aunt had supplied, as though I had a clue how to apply any of it. Feeling a bizarre rush of adventure, and other mixed emotions, I decided to try putting on some lipstick, at least. If I messed up, it would be easy enough to wipe off and start over. I screwed up twice, but on the third attempt, I thought I did a pretty good job. Stepping over to the full-length mirror again, I was amazed at what a difference lipstick made in my appearance. It wasn't as drastic a change as wearing the wig, but it was pretty close. I couldn't even imagine what I'd look like with a full makeover. Already, Luca was completely gone. There was no trace of that boy left, Tracy. My aunt called me Tracy in that little note. She's already in my head. I laughed to myself. Aunt Sophie had to know I was going to feel something like this, seeing the girl version of myself. Clearly, she was more experienced than she was letting on. I imagined that any boy would feel this, well, any boy who looked this much like a real girl. Simultaneously, I felt excited, queasy, and scared, but I couldn't look away from my own reflection. All I did was put on a few common garments, similar to those that half of the human population wears every day, and somehow, I feel that I've been transformed, or transported to an alternate universe. I've felt that before while cosplaying, but to a much lesser degree. I wonder if a girl would feel the same amazement, dressing like a boy in a convincing way. Or, Is it my uniform, magnifying the transfusion of femininity into my mind? Wait, did I just refer to it as my uniform? It was too much for me to process, and too far beyond my experience to understand it all. I was in over my head, but I didn't care. It was an adventure, like visiting a foreign land and traveling there by roller coaster. Suddenly, I froze. Oh, now, I'm paranoid, I informed the maid in the mirror. I checked all of the ceiling corners for video cameras. There were no stuffed animals with suspicious eyes in the room, and the alarm clock and TV seemed normal. There was nothing behind the vanity except for the lighting cord. Okay, so she wasn't watching me, but I know that she knows what's happening to me. She has to know. I'm feeling guilty, but I'm also having fun being pretty. And I haven't even been in here for 20 minutes. If she wants me to do this all summer, would I be able to handle it? Maybe I'm just caught up in the novelty of it right now, and this initial rush of excitement will wear off by tonight, feeling like a boring chore tomorrow. Aunt Sophie was waiting for me, so I sat back down at the vanity, put on some more lipstick, but I lacked the confidence to try anything else. My aunt would show me how to use them later. Wait, is that something I'm actually looking forward to? I cleared my head and stood up. I doubted that I could pull it off, but I had to try to keep my cool when I faced her. I tested my poker face in the mirror, but all I could see were bright red lips. I reached up to touch them and noticed my unpainted nails. I sat back down and picked up 2 bottles of nail polish. One was red like my lips, and the other a hot pink color. I knew what this was, and I had seen it done, but I knew I'd just make a big mess if I tried to paint my own nails. Both of my hands were shaking. Okay, no more distractions, I announced aloud to myself. You can do this. She's just your aunt, and no one else is here, so no need to feel embarrassed. You've worn costumes before. I took a deep breath, stood again, and opened the door. Show time. I took 3 steps into the hallway before I remembered that I was wearing high heels. Slow time. The walk of normally 20 seconds through the house to Aunt Sophie's study took me 2 minutes. I meekly knocked at the open doorway. She still was on the phone, but motioned for me to come in. That's fine. Just go ahead with the arrangement, and we'll discuss it further when I'm back in the office, my aunt spoke into her cell phone before setting it down on her desk. She rose and walked over to me, taking both of my hands into hers. Well, now, who do we have here? Maid Tracy, reporting for duty, ma'am, I playfully responded. A bit presumptuous, aren't you, girl? You think you're a shoo-in, just because your aunt is the boss? Letting go of my hands, she walked around me, straightening my apron here, adjusting my wig there, and measuring everything with her eyes. Well, I'm not exactly applying, ma'am. I was heavily recruited for the position. Touché, smiled my aunt. You smell very sweet. There's still work to be done here, but you have the potential to be very convincing. You'll have to learn how to tie a bow much better than that. How does the dress fit around the shoulders? Is it too snug? No, it's actually very comfortable. She continued to circle me, scrutinizing every little detail. How about the skirt? Does the waist feel too binding? The skirt seems a bit on the short side, but it's comfortable. Excellent. It's supposed to be that length. Also, there's a bit of stretch in the material, so it should still be form-fitting even when you have a corset on underneath. A corset? You mean one of those old-fashioned torture devices that lace all the way up the back? Your body isn't naturally curvy enough to pull off the look without a little help, but I was thinking more along the lines of a modern, elastic cincher, or maybe a more rigid girdle with clasp fasteners. Although, I'll have a traditional corset custom made for you, if you want one that badly. I rolled my eyes directly at her. Overall, I'd say I accurately guessed your measurements for the dress. You seem to be able to move naturally in it, and you'll be moving quite a bit. How about the sandals? They seem to be just your size, but do they hurt? No, they don't actually hurt my feet. The heels are still awkward to walk in, but they feel like they were made for me. That's because they were. I know what size you wear in men's shoes, so that was a much easier guess than your dress measurements. Besides, those are only mid-heels, but as you get more practice in those, I'll let you wear some taller ones. Baby steps, and all that. Aunt Sophie continued fidgeting with my uniform, without making eye contact. Twirl for me, dear. Aunt Sophie, for exactly how long have you planned this? And why are you so sure that I'm going to take the job? Oh, I got the idea about 5 weeks ago, right after my last maid quit. Even before I got your mother her job, I had intended to offer you this job for the summer. My plan was to grossly overpay you, so that I could help out without making Sarah feel like she was accepting charity. You'd be contributing to helping your mother tackle her financial problems, and you'd temporarily solve my staffing shortage in the process. And you'd both still have your pride. Hold on. I positioned myself to face her, suddenly more stable in my high heels. You got Mom her job? Oh, dear, did I just let the cat out of the bag? Yes, I pulled some strings, called in a favor, twisted an arm or two, and got her that job. Please be an angel and keep that between us. She hates feeling obligated, and it might damage her self-esteem if she finds out that she didn't get the job on her own merits. Aunt Sophie's confession wasn't an accident, and I knew it wasn't a lie. She had the connections and influence to make almost anything happen. My aunt smirked and folded her arms below her chest. If I announce to you that this is a guilt trip, will that be ruined, too? Oh, well, at any rate, this is my official attempt at a guilt trip, so add that on top of the bribe of your inflated wages. I need a full-time maid right now, and I don't have any other immediate prospects. I've been without someone for too long as it is, and the house is an absolute mess. I've had to eat out or order in every day, as well. I can't wait to have home-cooked meals again. My head was spinning. Aside from the manipulative nature of it all, I really couldn't disagree with any point she had made. The fact that she was pushing me into a corner pissed me off a bit, but I still felt excited about dressing as a girl. I was curious as to why I felt this way, and I wanted to explore it. Was I a blossoming crossdresser, or was this just another fun role-playing scenario, like cosplaying? I had to find out, but Aunt Sophie had some explaining to do, first. Aunt Sophie, can we sit down and discuss this for a few minutes? Certainly, dear. I know that I'm throwing a lot at you at once. No kidding. My aunt went back to her desk, and motioned for me to sit in a guest chair, directly opposite her. I'll let you start, Tracy, unless you'd rather I did. Thank you. It's obvious that I could just be your butler, if you need a household servant until you hired a new maid. While I have to admit that wearing this uniform is more fun than I expected, I've just considered it a game up until now. Why pressure your only nephew into cross-dressing and playing maid for an entire summer? I suppose pressure is a fair word, but I had a feeling that you'd enjoy it, to some degree. You certainly have the build and the face for it. I've seen some of the elaborate costumes that you and your friends have worn to conventions, so I gambled that you'd be game to try it, at least once. You even wore lipstick for me, or was that for yourself? Both. I've already admitted to having a bit of fun with it. I've never cross-dressed before, and I was too curious to pass up an opportunity that was practically thrown in my lap. It was exciting seeing myself as a girl in the mirror for the first time, but it's not like I'm ready to make a career of it. Fair enough, and your curiosity is perfectly normal. You're a cute boy, and I've always wondered what you'd look like as a girl. Don't worry, I'm not into incest or minors, so you're safe. In fact, I'm very protective of you and your mother. However, I do need to let you in on some secrets before we go any further. What I'm about to tell you is not to be shared, agreed? Agreed. Now she's got me even more curious. Not even with Sarah, agreed? I promise. Do you know what I do for a living? All I know is that you own an art gallery. Yes, true, but that's only one of my businesses. I run an import-export business, and I also own the property and building for a nightclub. Wow. My parents never told me that Aunt Sophie ran a nightclub. She's even cooler than I thought. A kinky nightclub, members only. Oh. Okay, that sounds a little scary. Have you ever seen Eyes Wide Shut, the film by Stanley Kubrick? No. I've never even heard of it. I've seen 2001 and Drive Strangelove. You'll watch it tonight, just to have a reference point. It's about a married couple going through relationship problems, but the film also features an exclusive, secretive organization made up of very wealthy and very kinky members. Suffice it to say that I'm a member of such an organization. My nightclub sometimes serves as an introductory point for recruiting new members, but we don't hold our meetings there. We usually take turns hosting events at each other's mansions, but sometimes we'll rent other facilities, depending on the activities. It's all very hush-hush, and we're keen on security for obvious reasons. Our members include some very powerful individuals connected with politics, entertainment, and big business. While I was shocked to hear all of that, it seemed like the type of thing my aunt would be into. I was afraid to interrupt, but she had paused, offering me a chance to react. So, do you guys hold orgies, or what? Sometimes. There are members who organize extravagant orgies of various sized groups, others just want casual sex without any strings attached, some are into full-blown BDSM activities, and others are into advanced role-playing games. For some, it's a daily lifestyle thing, but others just engage in isolated scenes on occasion. In a way, some of it is similar to your cosplaying, but much more adult-oriented. I see. And, well, what do you do? That brings us back to the point of all of this. You've met some of my maids over the years. Not one of those maids has been biologically female. My jaw dropped. No shit? My aunt glared at me. My parents absolutely hated foul language, and my aunt knew that. She never used foul language around me either, but I had assumed that was just out of respect for my parents. I was wrong. Tracy, whether you're being yourself as a young gentleman or playing the role of a young lady while working as my maid, you'll keep a civil tongue in this house at all times, even during our private discussions. Is that understood? Yes, ma'am. Aunt Sophie grinned. Naturally, I hear strong language every day, and it doesn't bother me when other adults choose to use it. I'm not a prude, and it's their business, after all. However, I hold myself to a higher standard. If you ever want to be considered a lady or a gentleman by anyone who matters, then you'll avoid the usage of vulgar expressions. And by the way, everyone matters. Understood. It's just that it's so hard to believe. All of your maids seemed so feminine. They even sounded exactly like real women, especially that last one. She looked like a model. Indeed, and I was very fond of her. But all things come to an end, and her time here was up. Normally, I know in advance when I'm going to have a vacant position, but this time it happened rather suddenly, and she was my only servant at the time. It will take me some time to find a suitable full-time replacement. There are many cross-dressing maids who'd love to serve me, but as I said, my standards are quite high. If you don't mind my asking, are they just here as maids, or is there more to it? There's more to it. Ah. I wasn't going to push further, but fortunately, my aunt explained herself. I was on the edge of my seat. I couldn't believe that my own aunt was a playa in the kink world. As you know, I've never married, and quite frankly, marriage doesn't suit my lifestyle. Sexually, I'm exclusively attracted to cross-dressers, and occasionally male-to-female transsexuals. I also consider myself an alpha female. I can't be in a romantic relationship between equals. I have to be in charge of everything, all the time. I have to dominate my lovers, sexually and otherwise. I enjoy having them dress as housemaids and waiting on me at all hours. Sometimes, I have 2 or 3 living in the house, but usually just one at a time. Wow. It's not that I don't love them, I do. I just don't want a spouse. I don't like the idea of having a permanent partner in life, or a soulmate. That might seem odd, because that's what most people want. I don't get lonely that way. I prefer being my own person, and not having my identity tied to someone else, and that's what happens when couples marry. I don't even want to cohabit with a lover, unless that lover is my subordinate servant. My servants can leave at any time, and I can dismiss them at any time, within the bounds of the employment contracts that we willingly enter into. Some arrangements are written, and some are strictly verbal. She paused again, allowing me a moment to absorb things. I appreciate you sharing all of that with me. I understand what's in it for you, but I don't get what's in it for your maids, unless you pay them a lot. Some are paid money, while others agree to work for room and board only. We meet each other through our kinky network, if you will. There are many people, not just cross-dressers, who are lifestyle submissives, and many who have domestic service fetishes. For various reasons, they enjoy being in positions of servitude and/or they fancy wearing the uniforms of domestic servants. To them, working here as one of my maids can be a very sensual experience, as well as being sexual, erotic, adventurous, or a combination of things. Everyone has their own unique twists on their kinks, but there are general themes that many of us share. Are you into the whole whips and chains thing? Like Sandem? No, but some of my associates are into that, including some of my close friends who are frequent house guests. So, you could wind up seeing some freaky things while you're serving. Because you're a minor, I'll have to shelter you from anything sexual that happens, but just be ready for some bold fashion statements from my guests. Sort of like the unconventional conventionists in Rocky Horror? Yes, that a good comparison, my aunt smiled. For my part, I love being obeyed, served, and worshipped. That's my kink. Personally, I don't get off on bondage or physically punishing my servants. I'm very strict, and I enjoy talking down to my inferiors, constantly putting them in their places, but they know that I love them. I expect them to do everything possible to please me. The longer they've served me, the more I expect from them. While in my service, they practically have no freedom, except for emergencies, and they're on call at all times. They also service me sexually, and I'm an extremely selfish lover. But that's exactly what they want and expect from me. They love being dominated, socially and psychologically, by a strict mistress or master. Oh, so you don't have customers and appointments like a dominatrix. You make long-term, contractual arrangements for them to be both sexual partners and functional maids. Yes, although sex is never included in the contracts. That would be prostitution, by definition. In arrangements that involve compensation, and not all of them do, because some of my maids are independently wealthy, neither party is compensated for sexual services. It would be similar to me having a lover, or even a spouse, and then finding a job for that lover at my art gallery. Legally, it's not prostitution, but in reality, sex is part of the living arrangement, because there is a romantic connection. It's a lot more than business. I love my maids. I enjoy kissing and cuddling with them as much as I enjoy bossing them around. I nervously laughed. This is so much to take in. Are you sure I'm old enough to hear this? Normally, I wouldn't have exposed these things to someone your age. But in my estimation, you're rather precocious. You've had to assume more of an adult role in your household since Gordon died, and the sooner you're made aware of certain realities of my life, the better we'll get along, and that's important to me. Our family is getting smaller, and we need to stick together. Besides, the timing also dictated things to a great extent. Your mother will be away, you need a job, and I recently lost my only maid. I can't argue with that. But, how will I be able to fill in for your type of maid? As family, we don't have that type of kinky relationship, so I'm a little confused. You're absolutely right. In your case, you'll just be a maid for hire, but you'll still be a cute boy in a pretty dress, which always amuses and delights me, even platonically. But, you'll miss having what you're used to, right? To a degree. Oh, I could hire a regular maid or two, just to keep me fed and clean my house until I find a new lover. The thing is, I've never had to do that. I've always had my adorable tranny maids, and I just can't bring myself to hire, well, someone who's not a gender bender. I love having feminized males around the house. Besides, with you being family and me paying you so much, I can still be very domineering, rude, and strict with you, without you taking it personally. Meanwhile, I'll be looking for a new lover among my kinky social circles. With any luck, I'll find a good candidate before the summer ends. So, by putting me in a dress and heels, I'm the next best thing? Exactly. At least I'll have the constant visual, and someone to obey my commands, which will give me back a sense of normality, well, my normality. As I've said, you're family, and you now know my secrets. As my maid, you'll see things that I could never allow a regular maid to see, without giving her a heart attack. I can still have certain people over without worrying about you recognizing them and squealing all over town. Several of us don't want it known that we all know each other at all, much less within the context of our kinky group. Even though you're not directly involved in the lifestyle, I can trust you to be discreet. Okay, in a crazy sort of way, it makes more sense now. Also, most guests know how I am, and they expect my servants to be transsexuals or cross-dressing males, very feminine, very submissive cross-dressing males. You're not in your school's drama club, but your cosplay events have given you at least some preparation for playing the role of my maid. None of my guests will need to know that we're related, unless it becomes absolutely necessary to tell them. Let's see, we'll call you Tracy Lucas, because we can't very well have the same last name after you start. Anyway, my associates also know that I don't share my servants, so my guests won't harass you or make advances toward you. However, as guests in my house, they will expect to be served food and drinks, and they'll expect you to know your place as a lowly domestic. After all, my reputation as a strict mistress is on the line. Your mother isn't the only proud one in the family. After hearing such a long and unusual story, I had to stretch, so I got up and walked around. I don't know which amazed me more, the fact that my aunt lives such an alternative lifestyle, or the fact that she just told me all about it. As I silently roamed around the room and stretched, she leaned back in her leather chair. Otherwise, though. I mean, aside from the lover part, you intend to treat me just like you treat your other maids, right? Yes, for the most part, I'll be very strict with you. I'll order you about, and sometimes, I won't be particularly nice about it. But there will be other times when I'll be very sweet to you, because I do love you so much, and you're so adorable. As my servant, you'll have to learn to roll with my mood swings. In front of others, I won't even acknowledge that you're my nephew or anything other than the maid you'll appear to be. I'll be Mistress West, not your Aunt Sophie, and you'll address me as Mistress or Mistress West. You'll have no social life, and except for bedtime, there are some nightgowns in your quarters. You'll always be in uniform even when I send you out on errands. Oh, I might have to run errands outside the house? Yes. And you'll have to be a girl for the entire summer, with no breaks at all, well, unless you have to go to the hospital or something like that. The wig, full makeup, nail polish, perfume, high heels, a dress, bra, panties, stockings, all day, every day. And the more I think about it, you do need a real corset, young lady. My eyes widened at the word corset as she continued. I intend to work your butt off, even when we go to check on your house. You'll do every dirty cleaning job there is. You'll also cook and serve all of my meals, because you'll be my waitress as well as my maid. You'll never be allowed to eat at the dining table where I take my meals, you'll eat only in the kitchen. You'll run my baths for me on occasion. However, you won't have to help me dress or do my manicures and pedicures. That's for lovers only. After being so vague for so long, my aunt finally laid it all on the line. I started pacing again, oblivious to my high heels, until I looked down at my feet. It seems that I'm already getting used to them. She watched me as I paced, this time with an understanding expression. Mentally exhausted, I walked back over and sat in the guest chair. I appreciate that you're not sugarcoating things, Aunt Sophie. That'll be a lot for me to get used to, but that's also a lot of money. And it's only for the summer, I suppose. She took pity on me, seeing my difficulty in trying to process everything. Tracy. My aunt smiled at me. I'm sorry, dear, but I simply can't call you Luca when you're dressed like that. Tracy, I realize that I've just dumped a massive amount of data into your brain and that I'm asking a lot of you. If you decide that this is something you simply can't handle, then you don't have to do it. I'll find you something to do at my art gallery, or I'll call in another favor with a friend to find you a regular, boring summer job that you'd find more appropriate. You don't have to decide tonight, but I'll need an answer by this weekend. However, if you decide to help me out, you know that I'll make it worth your while. I'll even triple the amount that I originally offered you. It won't be easy, because you'll be on duty at all hours, 7 days a week, and I can be very demanding. You'll do all of the cooking and cleaning all by yourself. I was serious when I said you'll have to wear a uniform every day, with high heels and full makeup at all times, even when we go to check on your house. You'll also need to learn how to curtsy and speak in a girl's voice. I can coach you in all of those things, but you won't succeed unless your heart is in it. I have a hunch that you might actually enjoy the challenge, but of course, it's your choice. Stretching my arms over my head, I again made eye contact with Aunt Sophie, whose face was expressionless. I puffed up my cheeks and exhaled, as though I were taking the most important decision of my life. As disturbing as some of her narrative was, I really wanted to see what her private life looked like. To my surprise, I felt more comfortable talking to my aunt dressed this way than when I was wearing my own clothes. Oh, I almost forgot to ask. Does Mom know what you're hiring me to do? Yes and no. Naturally, she asked me as soon as we were alone, and I told her that you'd be doing all of the cooking and housekeeping. I explained that my maid recently had quit, and so the timing was perfect. A couple of months ago, Sarah mentioned how competent a cook you've become and how handy you've been, helping out with the housework. Anyway, Sarah laughed a little at the prospect of you doing the same thing you've been doing, just switching from your house to my house, but she agreed that it was better for you to be with family for your first job. By the way, I suppose we'll both need to temporarily break character whenever she calls, assuming that you accept the position. I take it you didn't mention the uniform, though? You are correct, Tracy, Aunt Sophie mischievously grinned. I don't intend to volunteer that little detail myself, but you are free to tell her about your lovely uniform, if you want. As I mentioned earlier, I'll even take a photo for you to send her, if you beg me. We both giggled, as I quickly responded. That won't be necessary, not in this life. Just remember, everything else I told you is our little secret, or more accurately, our big secret. Oh, you won't have to worry about that either. To tell you truth, I'm honored that you trusted me enough to reveal all of that, even though I still don't understand some of it. I'm aware of how unusual my life is, so it'll take a while for it to sink in. You have a lot to think over between now and this weekend. She stood up and walked toward the doorway. I have an idea. Why don't you go change back into your clothes, while I order us some pizza? There's plenty of beer in the kitchen cooler. I'll pour us a couple of pints, and we can watch that movie over dinner. With all due respect, Mistress West, I rose to stand at attention. Ordering pizza and serving beer are tasks better suited to your new maid, and I should remain in my uniform if I'm going to properly serve you tonight.